So thank you all for coming today. This is the direct market entry strategy session for the Tech Export Cluster in partnership with Welsh Government. We are joined by Nick Pearce, formerly of Object Matrix, and now founder of Scaling with Scarcity. I'm going to butcher that name. I'm really sorry. It's just my pronunciation of things. So Nick is going to run us through his history of being a founder, what it was for the paths that they went down to for direct market entry strategy for various countries and what that looks like, whether that's doing OEM channels or licensing deals or partnerships. So I'm going to hand over to Nick now and let him lead. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone. Obviously, if you've got any questions, then please do let me know. I don't have a presentation, so I was just going to run through some of the things, give you a little bit of a background. So I'm Nick Pearce. I was a co-founder of Object Matrix, software company that started in Brussels in 2003, and we came back to Cardiff in 2006. We focused on the M&E industry, selling private cloud storage, if you like, to those guys. One of the sort of early lessons we learned about exporting was making sure you can sell to your local market before you decide to go outside. So sort of act locally, think globally is something we definitely learned in the early days. Because if you can't sell and support your products or services locally, then you'll really struggle to do that on the international stage. So that's number one to bear in mind. In terms of going out and exporting, we focused very much on the UK. And then when we decided to export, it was going to our nearest neighbour, which happened to be France. Luckily, a couple of us spoke French, which made that a bit easier. But one of the things that we did is we were in France all the time, and we would go there obviously for things like the rugby. We would attend events that the British government or Welsh government were putting on, whether that's at the ambassador's residence or the French prime minister's residence. And those things, whilst they sound difficult to get into, if you build a relationship with the Welsh government, then you will find those opportunities that will come your way. But the sort of the market that we wanted to enter the most was the US. And for a long time, we weren't ready. So we'd go to the US to trade shows, not to meet US customers, but actually to meet European customers. Because when your European customers go to Las Vegas for a conference, they're there for a week. And typically getting hold of a CTO in the UK is impossible. But if that CTO is in the US for a trade show for a week, you've got a much better chance of engaging with them. So we used to go to trade shows in the US for that. But also when we were there, we were building our brand. We were talking about being there and making some noise about being there. And that's my number one bit of advice, really, is in order to break into a market, typically you need that first customer. And if you can get that first customer at almost any cost, then when you get that initial customer, you need to make noise. So pepper the social channels with it, get in touch with trade magazines in territory, see if they'll write the story about the new customer. Because ultimately, when you go into a market, the first question you'll get asked is, who else is using it? So even if you've got a roster of amazing customers in the UK and Europe, American companies tend to be a bit more reticent to be the first. So getting that first customer is really important. And then, like I say, shouting about it. The other thing is that buyers, in general, tend to not respond to email campaigns or any of the inbound calls we like to think work. They tend to look to their peers. They look at the trade magazines and trade groups for recommendations on new technology and new technology partners. So by being part of that ecosystem, by having a customer who's willing to be your advocate, is really important. So get that customer at all costs. Now, if you're selling direct or not, one way you can do that is if you've got a customer in your own locality or geography that has an entity in the US. So we sold to NBC Universal in London and France, and that enabled us to meet the team in the US because they recommended us internally. So that land and expand strategy is really important. So if you can land, I don't know, Morgan Stanley in the UK, there's a really strong chance that you'll get an open door in the US to go and speak to those guys. So whether you're using channel or not, that is definitely a strategy to think about and using that network. In terms of that creating noise, prepare to get your bum on a plane. As much as we're all remote today, nothing beats sitting in person and meeting people for the first time. You don't build trust over Zoom or Teams. You build trust by sitting opposite someone and having a chat. And so, yeah, you need to get get on the plane. You need to be traveling and getting in front of people, attend trade shows, attend trade organizations, attend webinars, seminars, be the person that asks the question in the room. Nick Pearce, Object Matrix, when you ask for a question, you get your name in there, and people, will then be very willing to talk with you. And when you travel to go to an event, whether you like social media or not, whether it makes you cringe or not, it is really important to make noise about where you're going, before you go, when you're there, and after. Because if you tag the places, you tag the organizations you visited, as small as it seems, it does have a wider impact on your brand visibility in a new territory. If you can afford it, try and sponsor some of these seminars or events. That will certainly help you get the brand recognition. And typically, in the world of sports technology, they have something called the Sports Video Group. We used to sponsor the breakfasts, the lanyards. We'd sponsor a panel discussion. If you sponsor a panel discussion, you can get up on the panel and then you have an authentic voice in the room. So it's really worth thinking about the budget that you have available to do these things, because people buy from people, and I know people get annoyed with that phrase, but it's true. And so if you're in the room and you have an authentic voice because you're part of that community, then you'll find that you'll probably progress a little bit quicker. In terms of building a channel, again, it's very much the same process. You have to get a channel partner or distributor to trust you, number one, and then be interested in your product and hoping it's a differentiator. So in the US, depending on the market you're in, this can be difficult to find one distributor that manages the whole country. So you may need to find partners that focus on West Coast or East Coast, or a mix of the two, and everything in between. Channel partners and distributors tend to have tens, if not hundreds, of products from different companies. So you still have to do a lot of the prospecting and the legwork, and you still have to be out there meeting people at trade shows and events. People say that channel partners are lazy. They're not lazy, they just have way too many products. So you have to be the squeaky wheel. If you're not the squeaky wheel, you'll get forgotten. So you need to make sure you're building those relationships and having frequent contact with them from a sales and technical perspective if you have a technical offering. How do you identify those partners? Well, typically, if you speak to an end user prospect, it's always good to ask them who they use. So do you want a direct relationship, or if you use a channel partner, who do you use? Can you make an introduction? And a prospect will always make an introduction if they're interested in your technology. And that's obviously a very warm introduction if it comes from a customer. The other thing to do is look at your technology partners. If you have technology partners, as we did, find out who's representing them in those territories. Because it's a lot easier to work with complementary technologies and building a stack of solutions that those guys can sell than having individual things. So for us, we had a partner ecosystem of about 30, 40 technology partners that were integrated with our solution. And, we'd look at the biggest ones and find out who was reselling them and just get in touch, go and see them at trade shows, and sort of make a nuisance of ourselves until they accepted that it was a good thing to do. The other thing is look at your competition, see who is representing them in territory. It's not necessarily that those companies will come to you because they'll have a lot of sunk cost syndrome and they feel a conflict in representing two companies. But then at least if you know who's representing them, you can look around that ecosystem and see who their competitors are and go and chat with them. So a little bit of legwork, but all the information is out there for you to do that. In terms of really engaging with the channel, as I said, you'll have to do all the legwork and the prospecting. And get those guys trained. It's really important to make sure you've got a good training program, ideally online. So something like Talent LMS or similar, where you can put sales training and technical training, because you need to make sure that your partners are well trained because they're representing you and your product. And the other thing is that it sometimes feels counterintuitive to give money away, but if you find a deal in a new territory and you want to work with a channel partner, give the deal to the channel partner. Let them take the deal, take the commission and the margin, and represent you in that deal, because nothing will get a reseller's attention or a channel partner's attention than revenue. And it shows, that you're willing to invest in that relationship with them. So it's really a tricky balance to decide when to go direct and when to go with a channel partner. Some organizations like NBC tend to want to work with the manufacturer. But if your manufacturer is 20 people based in Cardiff and you've got NBC relying on your platform in New York and 30 Rock, you need to make sure you've got someone there to help and support. And whilst Teresa will give us some information on how to make that easier in a moment, the reality is that if you're a small scaling company, you can't afford to have sales and technical people in the US unless you've got some serious investment. You're talking for a good technical person in the New York area, 150K minimum, so that you can't do that organically. So investing in a reseller that has not just sales but technical resource is really important to making sure that they are your extended arm. So everything you can do for that partner will help you. If you praise them on social media platforms, they will come back and help you. If you provide them with marketing material, they will put it out there and they will help you. So you almost want to be a pseudo employee of your channel partner, helping them in every way you can, and they will reciprocate for sure. Again, selling direct, we had some experience of this, certainly in France and in, no, not France, sorry, in the US, and where else? I think it was Australia. But sometimes selling direct is because the customer mandates it. Selling direct is because they've had poor experiences with a reseller or integrator, and they don't want to have anyone in the middle. In those cases, obviously, it's in your interest to do that as long as they're happy with the SLAs of where support's coming from. It can be tricky because when you're doing business in the US, again, as Teresa will point out, you maybe want another legal entity in between you and the customer in terms of taking on the contractual risk. So as much as possible, we always try our best to go through a channel partner outside the UK, because they do handle a lot of the legal contractual risks. If you get involved in RFPs, then they tend to have to provide all of the financial information about their business and sort of buffer you from that as well. So my recommendation for any location where you do not have a presence is to go through a channel partner in reality. That's it on those things. And also, I think when you are going to put people in territory, especially in the US, you have to make sure that the DNA of that person or team matches what your DNA as a company, and that can be really difficult to achieve. And so, but for that, again, you need to really have some reasonable amount of money to invest in that sort of endeavor. When it comes to OEMs and tech partners, if you work with technology partners, you know, for instance, our software would run on Supermicro, Dell, HP platforms. Now, the salespeople in those organizations are more than happy to speak to you if you can help them sell more of their tin. Latterly, a lot of solutions running in AWS or Google or Azure, again, their sales teams regionally will be very happy to chat with you and support you in maximizing the use of their platform. So certainly making sure that you're very close to your technology partner from within the cloud platforms is really important. So Amazon has a very strong team in M&E in Europe and the US, and they do everything they can to support companies like ours to be more successful on their platform. Obviously, there's a lot of self-interest there, but it's certainly really beneficial. We did do one OEM deal where we licensed our software to a US company that was going to run our software on their own hardware platform and rebrand it. There's a lot of effort in that, getting the pricing structure right, getting the contracts right, ensuring that we had the ability to do a decent lead registration program, because if we're selling our product through channel partners and they're selling the same product but rebranded, we didn't want to both go into Disney with the same platform and compete against each other. So if you're using an OEM relationship and you're not, you don't have a presence yourself, that's obviously you avoid that. And like with all business relationships, you've really got to trust the people you're doing this with, and we certainly trusted the guys we were working with. But if you think that sometimes it can be difficult to get across the messaging of what your product or service does from your own team, then that's amplified when you're doing it through an OEM partner or a channel partner, because you really have to train them. It's the whole train the trainer thing. You need to train them. They need to become immersed in who you are and what your product is and what the benefits are. And I think that's actually one of the more important things to be doing when you're speaking with these partners is, what are the benefits of your platform and how do they get it across? So yeah, the OEM side of things, I don't have a huge amount of experience in, but we certainly did one OEM deal. It wasn't actually particularly successful, just for a number of reasons. I think it starting during the pandemic probably didn't help for a platform that had to be installed on-prem. But yeah, it was definitely a way of looking at how you can expand without using your own teams. And I would always look to see if there's an OEM partner that you can use. I think that's roughly it in terms of the core areas that I wanted to sort of mention that we sort of did, or I see happening in the industry that we work in. So if anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I'll go first. So it's a really interesting one for me, because a lot of the workshops and sessions that I'm a part of at the moment do keep reiterating the point about developing relationships. I was part of a workshop yesterday, and then it's also about using those subscriptions and technology partners to leverage your product as well. So when you were talking about using Azure and AWS, did they give you any sort of regions that your product would be? I think I'm asking, did they give the context to that as well, or did they sort of just leverage your product to relevant partners that they thought, or did they sort of give you insights alongside that?
It depends. I mean, so we were at the AWS Media Symposium 2 weeks ago in London, where they have all of their team, and then you meet other partners in other areas. And if you want to then go to the US or enter the US market, then they'll happily introduce you to their US team or in Asia Pacific. But it is ultimately all about relationships. It's about finding the person within the companies that you want to work with, whether it's a customer, a partner, or a channel partner, and building the strongest relationship you can. You know, ultimately that means face-to-face time in reality.
It's easier to have multiple people knocking on the door for you and your product than it is to be the single person knocking that door. It's a lot harder. And I do think impressions carry a lot of weight. So if you're there seen to be amplifying your channel partners by giving them the deals directly rather than taking it where you can, I think that goes a long way as well.
There's definitely it's a trade-off, but if you want to do business in a territory, then you're better off losing a little now to gain more later. And you know, like anything with all of us at any time in life, the multiple touch points that we get information from, if there's a correlation between them. So if a channel partner is sending out an email and you're in it, and then they happen to go on LinkedIn and see you posting something and you've seen them the month before, it all builds up towards people recognizing who you are. Yeah, that's really powerful. Is there any questions from anyone else on the chat? I'm going to say no. So perfect. Thank you so much, Nick. Pleasure.
I'm now going to pass over to Teresa Lewis, who is joining us from Mauve Group. Teresa is going to be running with us what if I just spotlight for everyone. Is going to be running us through employer of record as a service and what that looks like and how operationally that works. So you're going to stop hearing from me, and Teresa, here you go.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks to Tramshed for giving us the opportunity to share our knowledge with you today. So just to give you a little bit of a background about Mauve Group then, I'm the country rep and business development coordinator for Mauve in Ireland. So I'm in Dublin today, originally from Evervale though. And Anne Ellis is the co-founder and CEO of Mauve Group, and she was born and brought up in a small farming community in North Wales. And the Mauve Group of companies, they came into being 28 years ago when Anne and her husband John moved to Italy. John was a telecoms engineer and he was responsible for managing projects across many parts of EU. And back then, him and his contractor colleagues, they needed support in these new locations to get visas, raise contracts, invoice and receive payments. So Anne was actually nominated for the job of looking after John and his colleagues with these HR requirements. So they soon realised there was a niche opportunity for those services. And Anne then went and rented a tiny cupboard-sized office above a post office in the village of Pavo in Italy. And that's when she started working on these contracts and invoices. So from that office, back in 1996, Mauve was established, and they then began to follow telecoms projects around the world. And work evolved over the years. A trend emerged for expat assignments where permanent employees were transferred overseas. And Mauve recognised they could support and employ these permanent staff members. They knew it would be useful in circumstances where clients wanted to employ staff in places that they had no operational setup. So that concept of employer of record grew, and today now it's become one of our most popular services. So if we fast forward to today, Mauve has now established over 65 of our own global entities. We can support clients with our services in over 120 plus countries. And we recently launched Mauve Cymru, as Anne is very keen to promote Wales and support local business with their global expansion requirements. So this morning, we're going to focus on this employer of record solution, and it's one of the routes that you can take when you're considering expanding your business internationally. According to the World Trade Organization, small and medium-sized enterprises represent over 90% of the business population. In the 5 biggest countries in Europe, that's UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, SMEs make up for an average of about 35% of EU exports. 1/3 of surveyed SMEs generate over 20% of revenue internationally, and that figure is expected to rise to 47% by the end of the year. So that's almost half of their revenue coming from overseas. So in reality, SMEs, they're the lifeblood of the global economy, and these statistics tell us that they have a huge and powerful presence in the economy with a high success rate and promising revenue potential from their global expansion. So why is it then, when we think of international expansion, when we think of multinational companies, we only think of mega corporations like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and so on? So what could be stopping SMEs from taking the leap to grow your business internationally and getting in on the action like the bigger multinationals? So if we take a look at the landscape in recent years, we see how innovations in technology, as well as globalization, has played a significant role in the introduction of hybrid and remote work models in the world of business. And obviously, COVID-19 accelerated all this change. So we know employees are reevaluating what's important to them. And in fact, 41% of this global workforce is considering quitting their jobs in search of it. Today, we see companies refusing to adapt to this new work model. They're struggling with labour shortages, whilst companies who do adapt are not only filling these labour gaps with remote workers, but they have bigger talent pools of skilled workers to recruit from. But hiring internationally can be daunting, and some of the key challenges we can see here on the slide, that's employing staff compliantly, relocating them, paying global staff, and organising and setting up entities, and a lack of knowledge of certain local aspects, such as the labour laws and payroll and tax and immigration laws, and how to go about setting up a company. These are all factors that companies see as a potential barrier to expanding their operations globally. And so we understand the decision to set up a business operation in a new country can be very stressful and time consuming and expensive. But this alternative that we're discussing, this employer of record, this can be a great alternative to actually setting up. And think of it perhaps as a test drive to expanding your business operations. So how does an employer of record work? Well, it involves a tri-party relationship where three parties come together: a company, worker, and a global employment provider, such as ourselves, Mauve. And the EOR solution allows the provider, who already have a global presence, either through its own entities or partner networks, to employ workers on your company's behalf in countries where you lack that registered company. They are then responsible for making sure the worker has a contract of employment which is compliant with the labour laws of the country. And the solution then will ensure the worker is registered on the payroll in the country, they're paid correctly in local currency, and the right taxes and social contributions are paid to the authorities. And that leaves you then with more time for the day-to-day management of your worker. So for businesses that want to test potential markets, EOR is a brilliant alternative, and it doesn't have to cost the earth. There's many benefits to the solution, and we're going to go through some of them here. Not only does the EOR have an established in-country presence already, but it will also, number one, save you time, because it's going to work around the bureaucracies of foreign entity setup, and it'll speed up onboarding timescales considerably. Organisations, they require rapid deployment of staff to optimise the success of an overseas project. And when you use an employer of record in order to hire the employees on the ground, it means then you can begin hiring much quicker than if you were to go through the motions of setting up your own business there. And most employer of records estimate a fast timeline of roughly 1 month for the worker to onboarding process. And that's from the initial inquiry to getting them registered with payroll and getting contracts sorted and signed. And then another benefit to the solution is that it will save you money in comparison with setting up and maintaining the cost of a local entity. Because when you do that, these costs could include initial setup costs, ongoing entity management, closure fees, payroll and taxation, foreign exchange, and very often immigration if you are going to hire non-nationals. And often SMEs, they lack resources for an international project as they might not have the time, the money, or the staff to dedicate. So when using an EOR in a new country, it makes a project more financially viable as you save on the majority of costs relating to entity setup. And then you can also benefit from outsourcing the work required to make that project a success. And many business owners fear the risks involved when operating internationally, that of non-compliance, permanent establishment, or misclassification of workers. And one of the most important considerations, I think, when expanding a business is that of compliancy. And an EOR solution that's going to safeguard your global staff and help you stay on the right side of local legislation. So if you hire through an EOR, you should be guaranteed that your staff in country are employed in line with local laws. And in light of recent news within our industry, it's more important than ever to shop around to ensure that you partner with a provider whose solution is compliant, because some large corporations have come under fire for this reason. And sometimes cheaper isn't always better. And some countries have strict regulations regarding misclassification. So misclassifying your employees could lead to large fines, back taxes, legal costs, and other severe penalties. So when you employ international workers, you typically pay your team in one of two ways, either as contractors or as full-time employees. And how you classify your workers depends on a variety of factors. But if you misclassify someone as a contractor who should be an employee, your company could face some serious fines and penalties. And some examples of misclassification include the very well-known case of Uber. The UK Supreme Court awarded its drivers certain rights that they didn't have previously because they had been misclassified, included paid time off and a guaranteed minimum wage. So the employer of records experts will ensure that labour laws, including payroll tax, social security and onboarding, probation, leave entitlements and termination periods are completely adhered to and taken care of. Benefits, that's another area that can be a minefield for business owners who want to employ staff globally. Local employment regulations will deem what statutory benefits the worker will be entitled to. So, for example, some countries like Austria, they operate a 13th and 14th salary. So when you work out your budget, you should decide if these extra salaries are to be included in what you're going to offer the worker, or then be prepared to pay extra on top of this gross salary. Some locations may require mandatory enrolments to government health or retirement schemes. So it's really good practice to research what the statutory benefits are for the country that you're intending to employ in. But all of this is going to be second nature to an employer of records, local experts, and they're going to deal with those smoothly on your behalf. Employment law is complex, it varies by country, and non-compliance is heavily penalised. So an in-house contracts team within your EOR provider, they work with the new location's lawyers and templates to ensure compliant provision for benefits such as retirement fund, private medical insurance, life insurance and travel insurance and so on. So let's talk about the in-country support that you get when you use an EOR solution. Our own global expansions provided us with first-hand knowledge on the challenges of employing overseas. So using an EOR provider like Mauve Group means you're supported by a leading network of local experts in fields such as accountancy, legal and compliance. Be aware, though, that some EOR providers, they're predominantly platform-based and they don't always provide a dedicated account manager. So then it can prove difficult to get hold of someone when you have a query. And a good EOR provider will assign you with a dedicated account manager. And this person then becomes your one point of contact for you and your workers when it comes to any issues relating to payroll or contracts and HR. We also have a strong worker liaison team, which guarantees your workers are sufficiently supported while working in your overseas location. So what happens when your trusted member of staff suddenly wants to relocate to Australia? The EOR service can incorporate a global and visa immigration solution as long as the worker obviously meets the required criteria. Expert advice can direct you with the best type of visa to suit the worker. So by delegating the groundwork to dedicated experts, they're going to wait in line and liaise with government officials for you, and they'll submit your application on your behalf. Then that boosts your chances of approval, and saves you time, focuses your energy then and resources on your core business, so you can get your workers in country quickly and legally. So the EOR solution brings a great amount of flexibility when scaling a business, as the project that might only be short term, or things might not turn out as expected. So then you're not going to be left with an entity to manage and close down. And sometimes eventually the time might come where your operations have really taken off and they've grown to a size where you then need to consider setting up your own entity in your chosen country. And an employer of record then can help you choose the right type of entity for your needs. And they're going to help you incorporate it and then move over your employer of record workers back to your employment. So I'm going to share with you a case study from Mauve's own experience when it comes to helping companies to expand overseas quickly and compliantly. One of our clients, the Emmy Award-winning Brown Bag Films, who are based here in Ireland, they required assistance to rapidly hire 43 remote workers across 15 different global locations. So when we assessed this, if they were to set up in each country to hire the staff, it would have taken them probably between about 9 to 20 weeks. So for Brown Bag, opening 15 international entities at once would have had a huge impact on resources. So when they used our employer of record solution, they were able to hire staff without the cost and time investment that it would have taken to establish these own entities. So through an EOR solution, Brown Bag benefited from reduced costs relative to setting up themselves. So comparing EOR versus entity setup in Brazil, because that was one of their worker locations, we found EOR was 96% more cost effective in setup fees and 85% faster in setup and onboarding timescales. So to sum it up then, the process of operating in another country, it can be daunting, but with the right expert support, it can be a game changer for your business. An EOR service can be the ideal choice for companies of any size requiring rapid entry into a new country. The solution ensures that you retain the day-to-day management of your employees in country, while the EOR provider handles all the necessary local employment and HR tasks, bringing you peace of mind and compliance and cooperation in every aspect then of your staff's employment. So thank you very much for your time today. And if you have any questions at all, then please now feel free to ask.
Perfect. Yeah, that was really thorough. I think for me it's the flexibility of it. It almost gives you that extra protection, and a lot with what Nick was saying, having those partners in key areas, it makes it feel less daunting, I think. I can't see any raised hands on the chat. It might be one of those things that we do introductions after the session, but thank you so much for your time. That brings us to a close, unless anyone else has any other questions for anyone else on the session. Oh, Dan, hello.
Hey, yeah, I was just going to say, just a second to Teresa's point around shopping around. We have used an employer of record and we've not been terribly happy with that particular experience. But then we shopped around and looked at price over other earners. But yeah, if you're thinking about essentially your HR function and your legal entity in another country, yeah, would recommend shopping around. Apologies if the audio quality isn't great. It's through English.
Yeah, that's very true. Good to shop around. We got that message, and it is because there's so many different providers out there now. It's a busy market, to be honest. So what I would say is, like, cheaper is not always better, and sometimes it has come back to bite people. And we've had quite a few examples where people have got a provider, not happy with them, and then they've come to us. What I was going to suggest, Sarah, is I have a little article that I can put up in the chat, and it's EOR versus PEO. And I was speaking to Nick a little bit about this beforehand, and I might have confused you a bit, Nick, because I double checked. PEO is professional employment outsourcing, and it's like more of a co-employment, and it's a very popular model in the US. So it's slightly different to EOR because you do actually have to set up an entity, but then you get supported very much like you would with an EOR, with all the HR support, the payroll, and so on. So it is a slightly different model, and I have a good article that gives you the comparison between one and the other, and what to think about to decide if one is better for you. So I'm going to put that up in the chat now. Just going to copy and paste it a sec.
Amazing. Yeah, I think it's good to know what services are out there and just finding the right one for you and your business needs. And it is about establishing relationships and finding the right partner for you at the right time, I think. Everyone works differently, and I think it's just ascertaining if their way is right for you.
Yeah. There you go.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to take that link as well, and then when I send a summary of this session, that will go out to everyone. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining, and thank you to our speakers as well. I really hope that you've learned something of value. If anyone would like any connections or anything after this, then please reach out. So thank you all so much.